You do. Um, this training series that we are presenting, folks, over the next few weeks, is a SAMHSA funded project called the Opioid Response Network, and it assists states, tribes, organizations, and individuals by providing the resources and technical assistance they need locally to address the opioid crisis and stimulant use. Technical assistance is available to support the evidence-based prevention, treatment, recovery, and harm reduction of opioid use disorders and stimulant use disorders. You can move on. The Opioid Response Network, or ORN, provides local experience consultants and prevention, treatment, recovery, and harm reduction to communities and organizations to help address this opioid crisis and stimulant use. ORN accepts requests for education and training, and each state and territory has a designated team led by a regional technology transfer specialist, or TTT, who is an expert in implementing evidence-based practices. um ORN contact. So for anybody through any organization, if you're responsible for, putting together the TA, if you have your questions or want to submit a technical assistance request, you can always you can email them at www.opioidresponsenetwork.org, or you can email them personally at orn@aaap.org. For people that don't know about SAMHSA, and if you do, I'm sorry if I'm speaking to the choir. Um, but it stands for Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Um, if you're real familiar with like the recovery spaces and just like a lot of public health initiatives, you may have heard of their name. Um, Funding for this initiative was made possible in part by grant number 1H79T1085588802 from SAMHSA. The views expressed in written conference materials or publications and by speakers and moderators do not necessarily reflect the official policies of the Department of Health and Human Services, nor does mention of trade names, commercial practices, or organizations imply endorsement by U.S. government. And just to sum it up for people, what this piece is saying is that even though this organization is, funding this project, you may hear some things that are kind of out the box. You may not hear them a lot in a lot of spaces. Sometimes a lot of things that you may hear, it may leave maybe a bad, maybe concerns, matter of fact, I'm gonna say. Um, so that is their way of, just like, liability, so we could go to the next slide. Our approach with these series, we hope to build on existing efforts, enhance, refine, and fill in gaps when needed while avoiding duplication and not recreating the wheel. Um, when we facilitate these trainings, the one thing that we hope to give people is a different perspective. There has been a lot of service provider models over the years and decades, and it's not to say that those models were wrong or didn't work, but um, we just have to remember that we say community needs change every day. So if we know that community needs change every day, then that means that we have to have as fluid an approach as possible, meaning that our approach to the community in need, we should be able to adapt to them, to all the situations. Overall mission is to provide training and technical assistance via local experts to enhance prevention, harm reduction treatment, especially medications like buprenorphine, naltrexone, and methadone, and recovery efforts across the country addressing state and local specific needs. Um, we hoping that at the end of this presentation, you can take part in the evaluation, and that helps with understanding if the trainings were effective, what are some follow-ups that we can provide, and how this training itself, can be better. So if you want to, you can scan this link. And I'm sure we're gonna pull up the link after the presentation also, in case folks didn't get it the first time. So like we mentioned earlier, we are from National Harm Reduction Coalition. I usually tell people we're an advocacy agency, because almost every member on our team, are respective advocacy leaders in their state, in the region that they're from. And that's why I find this organization so cool. We have a bunch of people who are really concerned with the way our community has been treated, and we are here together, trying to find new ways. Um, so what you see in front of you is what we call our North Star statement, and it really guides the work that we do. It goes, National Harm Reduction Coalition creates spaces for dialogue and action that help heal the harm caused by racialized drug policies. We believe that many of um, new policies and laws, are usually created to keep specific communities um, in a certain place, primarily Blacks and Latinos and people of color, and these laws and policies that affect our communities, not only affect their health, but they also affect, their livelihood and what opportunities they can accept you know. So we try to address a lot of these concerns and issues our communities face through policy and advocacy. Like I mentioned, a lot of our staff members are respective advocates in their states. So you may see a lot of us in our state's capital advocating for, certain bills to be passed or certain bills not to be passed. We are also responsible for national and regional conferences. Our last conference was in 2022, and it was in San Juan, Puerto Rico. It was really good, and our conferences, our intention is to bring more spotlight to not only harm reduction, but just like a lot of the um, issues our communities face, So we may have more than harm reduction in the conferences, we may have people from recovery spaces, doctors, students, lawyers, even, the whole point is to, to spread a specific message, which is compassion for our community. We do a lot of training and technical assistances. We do help a lot of organizations implement harm reduction and peer workforce into their structures. We also help organizations become what we call OOPS, or opioid overdose prevention programs, which allow them to train and distribute naloxone either to their staff members or the community members. And also on our website, harmreduction.org, we have a lot of resources that people can benefit from. And we also have like various training packages, some free, some aren't. You could go to the next slide. So just some Zoom housekeeping. So if you feel comfortable, please add your pronouns to your name. And how you can do that is if you put your mouse over your video, it has three buttons on there. It says hamburger here, but I'm so technical. It's an ellipsis, but we're gonna stick with hamburger right now. But you click those three buttons and you scroll down to rename, and it allows you to change your name. If you feel comfortable, but I will feel uncomfortable misgendering someone, if somebody identifies as something else, that I wouldn't feel good about it. So if you do feel comfortable with it, please do. And you can also change your name to whatever you want. Um, while we are speaking, if you're not speaking, can you just please mute your mic? There will be times where we ask people to come off of the mic, because there are some questions that we hope can be in a discussion amongst us. But then, for those other times, so that people don't catch the background noise and they can have as good as an experience as they can, you know, we just ask that. Also, you more than welcome to use like the emoji Zoom offers like hand claps, thumbs up emoji, thumb down too. We take all kind of feedback, and also, technology, so if anything happens, let's just roll with them. If we just so happen to all get cut off, just come back. We're gonna come right back. But the weather's crazy, and over here is hurricane season and stuff. So you never know with the internet. So today we're gonna go over exploring trauma. We're gonna talk about the elements and functions of stigma. And then we're going to move on to trauma-informed care and healing-centered engagement, connecting concepts, and closing and evaluations. Um, you know, like I tell people, in harm reduction, we are big on language because as human beings, we internalize a lot, if not everything. And it's not only conversations, it's TV shows, excuse me, current events, we always internalize it and it really shapes our perspectives. Um, we also believe that one of the first chances of harm reduction you will get, with a person is through language, like the initial conversation, hello, how are you doing? Instead of what you want can make a difference, it also dictates whether we humanizing or whether we degrading an individual. This is why we try to stay away from certain words like addict, substance abuse or addiction, anything that's really labeling, especially if they're derogatory. Like there's more than addict, right? We have people that call people fiends. When we hear about new drugs through media, there's always like a disrespectful word, like xylazine is the zombie drug, to some media outlet. So this is why, we say, be mindful of your actions. As kids, we was taught sticks and stones break bones, but words never hurt. But for me, I have a bunch of scars on my body that I do not feel. Um, but there's a lot of things people was told me decades ago that still ring in my head, and I can still hear them saying it, right? So um, we have to be mindful of how we speak. Um, we do offer different, words we can use, right? So instead of the place of addict, we can use people who use drugs, right? Or however the person wants to be, addressed. Maybe by their real name, maybe by a nickname, they may just want you to refer them, in a different way. The whole point is however our community members want to be addressed, we should be providing that to them. Next slide, please. So brief review of stigma and substance use. As this is going to be one of our first conversations that we have. So I'm wondering, why do y'all feel people use drugs? Because we hear a lot of reasons, there's always a different perspective. Some people say people use drugs, because of mental health issues. Some people say because they just want to. What is your opinion on that? Please, not all at once. One mic, everybody. You're more than welcome to come off mute if y'all want also. Go ahead, Mary. You don't have to raise your hand. Don't worry. Man, it's cool. To disassociate from reality, someone said.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. I work in mental health, and I think like 99% of people who use substances are self-medicating, even if they're not aware of it. So, for example, a lot of people who use meth um, have undiagnosed ADHD, for example. So it's my opinion.
Okay. Someone in the chat said to disassociate from reality. Um, People can use drugs for any reason they wish or need. Really good. Um, and to disassociate from reality, we hear a lot, like, as a coping tool. Some people's reality is kind of hard, Um, Exposed at a young age, yes. Some use to stay awake and aware of dangers around them. Because they feel in their safe zone with them. Some of the people I have met said they use to certain drugs to stay awake so nobody hurts them while unhoused at night. And we're gonna go more into that in a second. Death in the family. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's try something else. Let's try something different. Go to the next slide. Well, we can look at this two ways. Why don't people stop using, or why don't people use drugs? However you want to answer that. Let's try that real fast. Because they don't want to stop. Yeah, that's it. Because they don't want to. Um, they don't want to be dope sick. Don't know how. No motivation to stop. Hmm. What about why don't people use drugs? Let's ask that one. Unable to stop. Stigma. You could go to the next slide, Harmony. Um, we always have to remember that there's always different reasons for using drugs, right? No, you could go to yeah. There's always reasons, and not only that people use drugs, but the reasons why people don't use drugs, right? And once again, remember I said we just want to provide a different perspective. We don't want to provide this is the way to think or this is the way not to think, but a different way, right? When we do this actual activity, when we do this in person, we usually have like two sticky boards side by side, right? So we can actually see both answers side by side. And a lot of times, what's on one sticky board is on another sticky board you know and one time somebody asked us like, well, what does that mean, and I always tell people like how we view drugs. We was conditioned to view drugs like that. When we think about back in the days, what the drug messaging was like, they had a message of somebody inflated with no air in them, as it was a dare program commercial, and that was them telling you this is what will happen to you if you smoke weed, and there's other commercials and other advertisement that are similar, right? And over time it became like a normality to say, it's definitely bad, and we're not sitting here saying that it's good, but what we're saying is that it's a reality. When I was living in the Bronx just a short year ago, I used to give these presentations and walk right out my house and walk down past a bunch of people smoking, whatever they smoking, doing drugs and all of that, and stuff like that. All that tells me is that this is a reality where a lot of people come from. There's not a time in my life where I didn't see drug use, and I was in my house and outside of my house. But what was the difference between now and then is what the messaging looked like. My father would be using weed and drinking in the house, but then when we walk outside, he'll have so much to say about the people who was using heroin and cocaine, and looking back, like I can actually see situations now, and I like understand where people coming from. It's like, Jesus, we so like caught up in our stuff that we don't see stuff, like we don't see that there's no different between one drug. One drug is not worse or better than the other drug, but we're so conditioned to look at it like that. Another thing is that when we was young, our parents didn't tell us, yeah, you want to be the homeless man on the corner. Our parents didn't say, yeah, go say hello to that homeless person. Bring some humanity to that person. And these are as a kid, that's when we learn the most, we absorb a lot. So as grown-ups in our head, we already associate drugs a certain way. We already associate people without a stable living in situation. We already see them a certain way. And I try to tell people a lot, like it's perspective. There's people who use drugs because of their religion, and there's people who don't use drugs because it's just not their thing. And that's how we have to start looking at, a lot of situations. It's not a right or a wrong thing. Our job as humans, it should be just to accept another human being, to be there as much as possible. So the takeaway, if anything, from why people use drugs and don't use drugs, I just hope folks can come with a different perspective. It's not because people don't want to do nothing with themselves. It's nobody go as a kid when they grow up to be hooked on drugs. Life is hard, and some people have access to certain resources and mental health supports, and some people don't, and they look for a way to deal with it. And some people just like being high too. So you go to the next slide. Um, and there's always like this, harm reductionists, we are the black sheep of the public health field because like a lot of times our messaging is kind of misconstrued because like our advocacy revolves around people who use drugs and uplifting them. Like there's this misconception that that's what we want the whole world to, be a bunch of people using drugs and then that's it. No, we just once again acknowledge that it's a reality. It's a reality for a lot of people. Once again, there's a lot of people who there's not a time in their life where they didn't see drugs. Harm reduction will utilize a spectrum of strategies to reduce the negative consequences associated with drug use, sex work, and other behaviors. That could be safer techniques, like teaching a person how to use correctly in a safer way where we don't have to worry about them being dead tomorrow. I remember when I first started in harm reduction, I worked with the youth, and there was this one person, 28 years old, was using half of his life, never injected himself, always was injected by his brother or his friend, you know, and I he didn't have that relationship no more with the person. And I like had to learn how to tie up. I never used that drug before, but I felt it was my job to learn how to so that I could teach this person, and you know, that person came back like 2 weeks later and was like, yo, thank you. Like that was really empowering. And being so young in harm reduction, I didn't understand why, you know, I'm like, what's so special about somebody learning how to tie up, how to inject the right way with a 45-degree angle and lower if it's in different places in their body. And then years later, I understood that it's not the action, it was actually the empowerment that the person was proud of, being able to do something by themselves, for themselves, not having to worry about having to be associated with somebody just so that they can be high or they can be good and all of that. So that's one technique. Managed use, especially if we're talking about uplifting the community, right? Managed use is definitely a conversation we need to have with our community members because there's spaces where the person won't be able to, maybe use the way that they used to use, in any other situation, like a job, right? Or if they have a day with a bunch of appointments or stuff like that. Or even if we see that the drug use is actually, counterproductive to their well-being, um, because we're in harm reduction, it doesn't mean we have to allow people to, just, I guess, like just go through risky stuff without like worrying about their safety or anything like that. No, it's our job to have those difficult conversations like, hey, do you personally think that you're using too much? No. Well, do you think that your drug use will allow you to hold down a job, if that's what they're looking for? Just different conversations that can actually promote care, like you care for the person, compassion, but it could also, have and maybe you planting a seed in their mind where later that night they laying in bed and they like going over what y'all was talking about, and you never know, that was actually the case with me, right? And then abstinence, right? Because we talk about harm reduction and the well-being of people who use drugs. That don't mean that we're completely against it, you know. And once again, I can only speak for myself, right? Like I experienced harm reduction before a rehab. So I was conditioned to, talk good on myself, to try to uplift myself as much as possible, because if I lose it all, those negative, messaging that I was getting ain't really going to be beneficial to me to get out those, spaces. So when I did go to rehab and they was trying to get me to actually do the opposite, it didn't sit well with me. But just because that's my experience, that don't mean that I'm gonna expect that experience to be the same for somebody else. So if somebody comes to me and is like, hey, I really think I need to go into detox, or I really think I need to go to rehab because my experience was kind of, messed up. I'm not going to say, nah, you don't want to do that. No, some people thrive under that structure, and the whole thing about it is having as many options as we can for our community members. So if anybody come to me today asking for detox or rehab, I promise I have so many numbers in my phone that I could pull up and I will call. I will never do that to a person. That's me, you know. But it's all about tools. So we're talking about teaching a person how to use safely so that they can have time and space to make well-informed decisions, managed use so that they could be in a mental position to be make those decisions, and then abstinence if needed with individuals. Yeah. So harm reduction as a movement, once again, we believe public health is social justice. How many people's lives could be turned around if they have the proper access to care, and services without bias and stigma. Um, we do acknowledge racism, stigma, and criminalizations can cause harm. And we see it, regularly. The prison system is a revolving door organization. Why? Because the more you paint somebody as a villain constantly, eventually that person is going to willingly step into that role. And we're seeing a lot of that now. And as time goes, how, it gets more intense in certain communities in the hood and all of that. It gets more intense because of that, because it's not being acknowledged and actually is becoming worse. Um, we also believe in the inequality and oppression and in fostering health and liberation. Um, and leadership of the most impacted is key to transformative change. Which is why we believe in, all of these tools that I mentioned earlier. Because if we uplift the community members and we put in certain seeds in them, now they may want to be in certain spaces, decision-making spaces, or the spaces that count. And a lot of policies are made for our community members without our community being in those spaces, and this is why a lot of services don't touch our communities, because we don't know if those services are what our community needs. There's not enough conversations in our community for them to say what's needed, So definitely leadership of the most impact is key. Personal autonomy also, an individual's capacity for self-determination or self-governance. Um, I was having this conversation with Jasenia yesterday, and I've had this conversation with a lot of people also, where in harm reduction, we have a motto where they say, we meet people where they are, and we don't leave them there, and a lot of times, we're so caught up in providing services and supplies to our community that we forget, to actually pull that person up. We forget to focus on helping, giving this person life skills that's going to enable them to make decisions for themselves, which is the definition of autonomy. And it should be our goal, when we're dealing with our community members, for them to be able to do for themselves. If a community becomes dependent on anything, whether it's program or supplies, the community won't walk for themselves. It's basically how they say, it's the giving someone the fish versus teaching them how to fish. I don't even know if it's case management, but when I was doing some kind of counseling with the youth, that was my goal, to give them as much information as possible so that come Saturday and Sunday, I can just be on my game. I could be with my cats and like nobody bothers me because I have toxic boundaries at work. Like if one of the people I'm providing like support or something calls me like on a Saturday at 10 p.m., I'm gonna pick up, like so to avoid that, I felt like we give the individual as much skills and as much support as possible. That way, Saturday and Sunday, they good. But then, that 2 days, it goes up eventually, right? Because we having conversations with them. We're like not only providing referrals, but like, we are that support system for them. So 2 goes to 3, and that number keeps going till eventually this person is thinking on their own. They are a leader in their community. They either a peer or they're in a higher position or whatever. But that was my goal, and I feel like if that's not our goal as service providers to our community, for them to like not be dependent on us, then we might be in the wrong field, you know. Next slide, please. Radical neutrality and acceptance. Providing harm reduction services requires a willing to practice radical neutrality, grapple with ethical gray areas, tolerate, accept, and understand difficult behaviors, be taught by clients, relinquish the role of authority, judge, or expert, and partner with clients. That's what Pat Denning and Gene Little said, and I'm a strong believer of that. It was actually one of the hardest things that I had to learn first when I first started in harm reduction, because we have our beliefs, right? And sometimes there's good intention in having our belief. Like, I came into this field, I'm like, obviously I stopped using drugs. That should be somebody else's, and that's not the case, right? And when we start throwing our expectations on people, not only are we pushing them away, but because we don't get the result that we're expecting, we're actually walking right into a burnout. And I had to learn that the hard way. And honestly, we don't get nothing done without the community being there, right? So how do we get the community to be there? Well, we have to learn from them. We have to learn the community, which is why we're heavy on have the conversations with the community, have community advisory boards, find reasons to go into the community to talk with people, whether it's community fairs, or whatever, anything to get in contact with the community. Because once you start building a rapport and a relationship with them, you start getting information that other people aren't able to get because they're not willing to step into those spaces. So just keep that in mind. The drug setting model is what gave me not a better understanding, but it really helped my approach with dealing with like people from different walks of life, not only people who use drugs, um, but you know, as long as we have the time to the time and capacity to step back, right, and not react, we'll be able to see that the effects a drug has, meaning what kind of drug it is. Every drug makes people react different, right? Like K2 is known for like, making people a little angry if they use it angry or too happy or whatever, right? Heroin is known to make people relaxed, right? So knowing the drug, but then knowing the mindset, right, that the individual is in. Like once again, K2, K2 was a drug that, if a person used it happy, when they used K2, they will be extremely happy. If they used it mad, there was going to be a problem. The same thing with sad, with depressed, all of those feelings get amplified. And it's the same thing with a lot of drugs, right? A lot of people reaction to drugs is different. I've seen people just become like really angry smoking weed, so everybody's different, right? But once you get to know people and you asking questions and you actually seeing too. So, you will know what drugs put the person you're providing support to in a certain, space. But then is the setting too. And we speak about the importance of a setting also when we talk about people who use heroin or fentanyl or stuff like that, right? How, those is drugs that have to get prepped before they have to be used, right? And like if a person is homeless or they don't have a stable place for them to actually prep that drug, which is why OPCs are so important today. But if they don't have that time, there's no saying if they mix that drug properly. They don't have the time to what we call a test shot, which is if you don't know what's in your drug, use a little bit of it. No, because they're in that hectic and hostile environment where they constantly got to watch over their back. They don't have that liberty or privilege of doing those. So this is why we say people who are like homeless, they have a very high risk of overdosing compared to somebody who, let's say they have their own apartment. They don't have to worry about no police, nobody. They're in their place. They can mix their drug. If they got a test shot, they can, take a little bit. They can go get some juice, go use the bathroom, come back. Oh, I'm good, and then use the rest, so setting matters. So put all together, once you understand like how the drug reacts with an individual, various drugs, obviously, and then mindset of the individual and the setting, the place, it kind of gives you an understanding of maybe why a person feels a certain way or why, a person is, in this maybe position that they in, right? So, but the thing about this model that I love is that you could take that drug out and you could replace it with anything. So for sex workers, you could replace it with sex. For mental health, you could put mental health, for any single thing. And I tell people anything, just take the drug out and replace it with what you want. This model is so amazing because the point that the intention of it is to give you that space to step back, okay, this is what's going on. Looks like this person's been using this, and you're able to like actually create different approaches. So this is a really good step one to get into that place. Next slide, please. What is stigma? What do y'all feel is stigma? What does when you explain it to somebody what stigma is, what is your answer? I hope I can hear from more people. No? Negative feelings towards certain demographics, making people feel ashamed, judgment from preconceived notions.
So I wanted to just also just looking at, I think this picture or this graphic is really strong, right? It speaks so much about how somebody feels when they're being stigmatized, or their fingers look like guns, like they're being shot at, and this person is just hovering over in shame and has the light on them, like all the attention on them and the shame that they're feeling, right? And I know we're getting some things in the chat, and I hear assumptions, identifying clients as they see them, preconceived notions, and yeah, making people feel ashamed. What else is coming up for
And
folks?
also the finger pointing also. you know,
Mhm.
like the finger pointing. And something that I learned when I first started in this game, somebody said, um, think about when you point at somebody. You know, you got one finger pointed at them, but three are pointed at you. And that's for a reason, right? So for every time you can shame somebody, there's probably 3 times more that you could shame yourself for. One for the judgment and and stuff like that. So yeah. Mhm.
Thank you, Jose. Anything else coming up for folks when we see this? The idea in your mind that makes someone a bad person? Yeah. We're going to move on to the next slide. Thank you. And stigma, right? So when we're thinking about stigma, we like to break this down into 3 parts. There's stereotypes and ideas. So people are blah, blah, blah. They're incapable. People who are drug users are incapable, fragile, dangerous, cannot recover. We can fill that blank in with whatever people experiencing houselessness. And so then there's a prejudice, and that's the belief, right? They are scary, they're shameful, less than. So again, filling in that blank, and you can say people that have mental health conditions, people who are experiencing houselessness, they're scary and shameful. And so when we see somebody on the street, that's the idea that we carry out. Yes, thank you, Brittany. Yeah, we're othering folks, right? And then the action is discrimination, right? And then there's social and structural discrimination. I don't want them to live next door. We have a lot of not in my backyard kind of attitude, right? Like, I don't want to see the syringes. I don't want to see, I don't want my kid to go through the park and have to pass through people sleeping on the street, right? I don't want my coworker to be somebody who uses drugs, or marry into our family, right? And then there's structural racism, which is probably the hardest part of what we're trying to break down every single day from the very first person to person work that we do. A lot of us do a lot of direct service work, and then the structural aspect of breaking down all these structures that make it really hard and challenging for people to access services, right? And looking at our policies and procedures, what do we have that say, that we have to be sober, we cannot have a criminal background, and all these things that make up your place of work. That's okay, that's fine. All the things that make up your place of work that make it really hard for people to either get hired or maintain their employment, right? We don't have these structures set up to make people who use drugs successful in the workplace, because all these different factors are going to come into play by the policies and procedures, or just the stigma that people experience on a day-to-day basis by even disclosing information. And so there's also some times where when we're looking at the structures that we have in our workplace, people can't even confide in your coworkers to talk about these things to get access to help. Even in places where we have a lot of the knowledge, we have social workers that can maybe connect us, but maybe they're not able to fully disclose about their drug use and cannot go to each other in your workspace, which we spend so much time in, to get the support that they need, because stigma still exists with drug use, mental health conditions, and houselessness. Thank you. We can go to the next slide. Or Jose, did you want to jump back in? You're good. I can keep going.
Yes, my fault. It was supposed to come on trauma, not stigma. My mind is so everywhere.
You're good.
So stigma, according to Lincoln Felon, is a social process which can reinforce relations of power and control, and it can lead to status loss and discrimination for the stigmatized. And this is something that we try to tell folks also, like when we do like our harm reduction trainings, we have something called the 6 principles of harm reduction, right? And then we start talking about um um excuse me, culture related factors, culture related factors when, talk about harm reduction. And, this speaks to me basically in that sense, when we, we, we just have to understand what our actions have done for our communities, what they are doing for our communities, our outlooks, like there was a kid that got killed on the train about a year or two ago, and because of the stigma that people who are homeless have, like everybody was like, the man was right for that, but nobody decided to think like, if this person's panhandling on the train, nobody's looking at him, person's probably sleeping in the street, you know, frustrated, was like actually telling people he wanted to harm himself. And there was another individual that felt threatened, and put him in a chokehold and killed him. And they didn't even arrest this individual right there. Actually, it took like weeks, probably a month and change, for them to actually say that, yes, let's, like he was wrong for that. But throughout that time, from the time the incident happened to the time where the individual was arrested, there was so many news medias about like different concerns we should have about homeless people, not only housing, but like how if they're sleeping on a train, they can rob somebody and they're rapists and all of this other stuff. So that by the time this person got arrested, the whole world's like, why? Why you arrest him? This guy's a hero because he has a military background. Yes, Jordan Neely. So we got there because of stigma. We got there because of stigma. Like just a year before that, we had Cuomo talking about, there's through COVID, there's homeless people using on the streets, and don't arrest them, but don't arrest homeless people, but arrest the people who are using drugs, right? So, and making connections between the two, and then look where we at. So anyways, I'm sorry for going on that tangent, but when we enforce stigma and stigmatizing languages and approaches, we're adding on to it, and um I just feel like all of them years of stigma just led us to that point of nobody caring an individual gets murdered because they was panhandling. You can go to the next slide. What are ways you think stigma shows up in your work? Or in just in the workforce in general? Y'all don't have to um do it for like your job. But what are ways stigma shows up in general?
Wendy, we can't hear you, but I see that you're unmuted.
Okay. So well, but just to think about it, we got a quiet group today, but um okay, self-stigmatization or seeing how others react to our clients when they do come in. And this is why I also said like those language is usually like the first time we get like the opportunity to give harm reduction to somebody, right? How different is a hello, how are you doing? How are you feeling versus what are you here for? Not this one again, how stigmatizing those are, what labels those put on people, you know, um, you saying to somebody, not you again, or this again, you're already telling this person that they've been a problem. Stuff like that. This is why I'm big on language, and also this is why we say like the most important person in the organization, hands down, will be that receptionist, because it's that receptionist that's responsible for giving that, right? It's either they're gonna enforce it or they're gonna enforce a loving approach, you know, because the receptionist, the first person the individual sees, so that receptionist is going to say either you again, or they're going to say hello, you know, and basically set the stage, you know.
So I was also going to add, even looking at the signage and the brochures and pictures that we have hanging around when we walk into our spaces. What do they represent, right? Are they, if we're doing services and we want to include trans homeless people experiencing houselessness, what kind of signage do we have around that makes people feel welcome the second they walk in, where they know, like, yes, this place is for me, I feel cool here, I feel safe here, right? Like, what do we have that's even graphics that are stigmatizing language for folks when they walk in that door?
I agree. Somebody said, I work in the emergency room and staff always identify the patients as a substance use disorder or alcohol use disorder are back. And that is so true. And also something we say in conflict de-escalations also, where it's like, well, let's say a person is having a bad day, they come, somebody rubs them the wrong way, and maybe they start acting, you know, a little hyper. Do you think it's right to say to somebody else, you know, who in the future may have to deal with this by themselves, oh, don't worry, you know, that's usually how they get when they drink or when they high. How many times I've heard that so many times. And yes, that's enforcing that stigma. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes. You can go to the next slide. So the cycle of drug-related stigma, you know, how stigma, it turns into the stereotypes and the labels, right? Once we have a certain outlook on people who use drugs, like on anything really, but let's just say people who use drugs. Once you identify drugs as bad, you're already going to come up with reasons why. You know, oh, they bad because, oh, they make people kill people, rob people, rape people. You know, we hear all of this all the time. So that the next person that they talking to, the next person they see anybody using any drug, they already have that in their mind. There's also expectations, right? How I was talking about managed use also. And I usually give a very controversial discussion when I talk about this. But the fact that, let's say we hire somebody from the community, and let's say that person comes in high, and how people say, oh no, because this is harm reduction, we have to let them be. How disrespectful is that, and how stigmatizing that is? Because if it was somebody fresh out of school or somebody from a privileged background and they came to work high, their boss would stop them right there, like, yeah, nah, go back home, or they will lose their job, right? And some people would be like, well, isn't that a good thing? It's really not. Because one thing we need to do with anybody that we provide support with is we need to promote responsibility. Let me tell you, harm reduction and just people having an accepting mentality towards people who use drugs and drugs in general is slim. Because if somebody steps out of that circle of people who accept it, which is the rest of the world, they might be in a position where they come to work high again. And guess what? Because it was allowed in one place, they're gonna be let go, and they're gonna wonder, like, but I ain't do nothing wrong because we didn't put that in that person. But then here's where it becomes stigmatizing. How it says expectations and roles. What that's actually saying for the individual is that you don't think that this person can mentally comprehend this enough for them to think about different managed use options. Because that's the proper way to address those situations. And not only with a person that's working, but conversations have to be had. Let's say somebody's in hepatitis C care, and you know that's on a good appointment day, that's about 4 or 5 hours. That's 4 or 5 hours that this individual cannot use because the doctors are very stigmatizing and will walk them right out the door after that. And you know what? Who knows? If they're in a certain part of their drug use, it might interfere with their treatment. And if it interferes with their treatment, they might become resistant to that medication, which can stop them in the future from getting on medications and stuff. So managed use would definitely work in those situations. But if we feel that they're not capable of having that, we're adding that stigma on there, and we're actually creating what I call a revolving door. At some point in time, we have to teach responsibility, which is managed use, and this is why it's part of our arsenal. Because our sixth principle of harm reduction is being pragmatic and realistic, and that's saying that we do acknowledge what comes with drug use. This is why we say we don't condone or condemn. We acknowledge what comes with it, and I'm here to support my people through this. I want you to be successful, and I want to walk you through this. I believe you can do it. I believe you can make the appropriate changes you need. But if we don't feel that, we're adding on to that circle of stigma right there. Because you know what that leads to when we don't enforce those, that empowerment, limited opportunities. And then once they start getting it, the opportunities become limited to the point where they feel like they can't win, they can't do nothing. You know what it does? We move right on up to it being internalized and reinforced within themselves. So there's so many conversations we have to have when it comes to stigma. It's not only the words we use, but it's how we walk our community from the lifestyle that they in to a completely successful lifestyle. Next slide, please. So I love the virtuous cycles, right? Because we're talking about creating a climate of trust, right? So we're talking about cultural safety, right? And that's not only race and ethnicity, but drug use is a culture for a lot of people. So they're able to live how they want to live, be who they want to be safely, make the steps that they want to do no matter their circumstance, because drug use definitely should not depict a person's level of success, right? So we need them to be culturally safe in that. We think about positive outcomes for people who use drugs, and not only them, but the communities they come from. We're talking about development of interpersonal linkages, creating an organizational climate of trust, which means it shouldn't be only you with this state of mind. It should be everybody that's working with, any person who uses drugs. Because how can we safely hand somebody off to someone who does not believe in the safety and well-being of a person who uses drugs? And then also, it addresses trying to rebuild systematic trust, because honestly, is with everything that's happened to our community from the public health and medical work field, it's going to take a lot to rebuild that trust, but when we start changing our policies and the way we view things, and we see things as an organization, we're taking one step into rebuilding the structure and rethinking what societal norms really look like. Next step, please. Next slide, please. Once again, going back to language and how we speak to people is so important, and the stigma that an individual faces, so when we're talking to people, when we're addressing people, we have to worry about race and ethnicity, because, people of certain races and cultural backgrounds, they get put in certain brackets, especially if they can't speak English like that. Gender, especially nowadays, we're hearing a lot about it. We're hearing about Project 2025, y'all, sexual orientation, choosing to abstain, how people appear, how the drugs are used. These are all ways that labels are created for our individuals. And this is why we're big on, hey, we're not going to call nobody an addict. We're actually going to call them a person who uses drugs, and to their face, actually, we're going to call them what they want to be called, so, and it don't matter where they come from. It don't matter what their background is, their race. It don't matter what they bring into the table. They all need the same equity, basically. Next slide, please. This one's you, yeah.
So I know that we have at least one therapist in the room, right? And you all have been quiet, but I just want to put this out there. So what is trauma to the folks here? What does this mean to you? I lost my chat. At some point or another, most of us have experienced some type of trauma, right? Whether that's personal, by others. What are some things that come up for us when we're thinking about trauma? Go to the next slide. We're going to use the definition from Sansa, and we're going to also go into the 3 E's of traumas, which are events, experience of events, and effect. But for our definition right now, we're going to focus on an individual trauma results from an event, series of events, or a set of circumstances that experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening that has a lasting adverse effect on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being, or all of those things. Next slide. One of the traumas that folks can experience are structural, historical, or intergenerational trauma, right? And these are traumas that have been experienced by whole communities. And that could be natural disasters. Right now, I mean, had mentioned earlier that we have a friend and our colleague in Puerto Rico, they're experiencing a hurricane. Puerto Rico has gone through so many hurricanes and has been affected for so many years. And we're also looking at here in other places where people have experienced natural disasters like fires. We're in California, all the fires that happen in California that folks are experiencing, and from the trauma that comes from that we are as a community having to face, right? And it's also things that are inflicted by one group of folks to another group of folks, including slavery, the war on drugs, for instance, and how that affects specifically Black and Brown communities and Indigenous communities. The resulting trauma is often transmitted from one generation to the next when we're talking about intergenerational trauma. And that is, you know, it doesn't just stay with that one person, it transpires into other folks. And so folks that have experienced the war on drugs, when we have people incarcerated, we have our fathers and mothers that are still in jail, and that how that affects you from one generation to another of having that parent be incarcerated for so long because of the war on drugs. And go to the next slide. And like I was talking about earlier, there's different types of trauma, right? We have collective trauma, the interpersonal trauma, and individual, and all these things interface each other. They're not separate from each other. They're intersectional, right? So you can have your childhood, adverse childhood experiences, which you will, like, that can be an individual trauma, but you might also experience that and how that affects your community and your neighborhoods. You know, we don't just experience trauma in isolation. The way that we experience trauma affects everybody, and how we address trauma is also a collective approach, right? So these are some examples of the different types of traumas and how they all intersect. Oh, we get a break. So we're going to take a 10-minute break, and when we come back, we're going to continue talking about trauma. There's a video that I would like to show you all. But we're going to take a 10-minute break. It's 11:12 right. Oh, wait. Are we all in California? No. I don't know what time it is everywhere. Right now in California, it's 11:12, and we'll be back at 11:22. And we'll stay back just in case there's any questions or anything that you all need. Oh, Sarah, how many do you need a break? I can stay.
Susan was asking about the video. I haven't watched it, but are there subtitles in Spanish for the video?
I know, I'm sorry, Susan, there aren't.
Thank you.
I'll ask when we come back from the break, Susan, if there's a need for that, and then I'll figure out a way to maybe put something in before we send the slides out to share with folks that might need it in Spanish or something.
Well, we can interpret the video. It's just often they're very, very fast, and we
Yeah.
haven't had a link to be able to pre-watch it. If it's a couple of minutes, if you could shoot us the link, we'll watch it.
Yeah. Let me
Do we
do
need to interpret right now, or can our interpreter take a break? She's trying to interpret for what I'm saying.
Yes, please take your break. I'll
Take
get
a
the
break,
link.
interpreter. Anyway, if the video is just a couple of minutes and you shoot us the link, we'll take a look at it. And while I'm here, Jose, you get so passionate, and that
I
speeds
gotta
you
slow it
up.
down, right?
Yeah, can you
Blackbirding
slow
may
it
be
down?
a simple word, but
We
it's
can keep track of. We can keep
blackbirding may
up with
be
you,
a
but-
simple.
I was telling myself too, this is why there was a lot of times where I was like, hold on, take a pause and try to slow it down. But you're right, and I will be more mindful of that moving forward. Yeah, I do get passionate.
I mean, we keep up, but we're going
I apologize.
over
I'm
the speed
definitely gonna
limit.
slow it down this time. I got you. Oh, we got y'all on Sonic mode right now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm talking through my phone, which is just a participant. I'll shut up.
I will slow down. I got you.
Harmony, can you get the link to the slides? I can't seem to get it. Oh, maybe if I open it on YouTube.
I shared it with them.
Oh, thank you. Ah, you're the best. Okay, couldn't do it. What's that? We have less than an hour, so I might have
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, we may have to that's what I put in the chat too. We may have to that we may have to like not focus on the questions and speak less, I guess.
Let me see what I can skip to. Hold on. video later. Just for the sake of time right now. So we're going to jump into an activity to see if you all can talk to each other at least. We're going to break you out into groups. And what we're going to do is have you all join the groups. If you are bilingual or monolingual Spanish, you're going to stay in this room. So don't accept the breakout group. Just stay in this room. And so what we want you all to be talking about is the impact of trauma. And in your small groups, you're going to be discussing the following questions, which are, what are some physical reactions to trauma that you've experienced or you've seen in others? And then what are some emotional reactions to trauma, again, that you've seen in yourself and others? And then what are some ways that trauma can impact someone's ability to engage in services? So I'm going to give us a second to do the breakout groups. And like I said, if you are bilingual or monolingual Spanish, if you want to stay in here, and we can do the discussion here. And if not, you can join one of the groups that you get assigned to. And we're only going to take about 5 minutes to do this. So it's going to be a very quick group discussion. So go ahead and join the groups that you have been assigned to. For the folks that are still here, are you all bilingual or monolingual Spanish?
Yes, bilingual.
Bilingual, Fabiola. Hi, ¿cómo estás?
Hi. Bien, bien.
So yeah, we can talk about this here together.
Okay.
You prefer English or Spanish?
Whatever you choose, I'm comfortable.
And who else is here? Sorry, let me see. Danny, Travis, Manuel. We still have a few folks here. Are you all having issues connecting, or are you here because you want to stay with the bilingual group?
Turn the switch on, that easy.
¿Cómo?
Huh?
Bueno,
I like
Fabiola,
the first one. Sorry.
you're good. So hi. Whoever wants to start, what are some ways that that trauma has showed up in a physical manner for you all? And we can stop recording since this is a group, right? Thank you. And hearing these stories and doing this work really takes a toll on our bodies, on our well-being and our spirituality, right? And so being able to really take some time and support our staff, support each other, and support ourselves when we're experiencing our own trauma, whether that's vicarious or things that are coming up for ourselves when something's happened in our place of work or in the world, and being able to really take the time to acknowledge that and try to move towards a well-being of addressing that trauma in whatever way that we can, right? And I know that's not always possible. Next slide. Stigma and trauma are extremely interrelated. We cannot separate these two, right? Stigma causes a lot of trauma. I know Jose was talking about even their own experiences of having been told certain things. I myself, have a huge narrative of all these things of what I am and what I'm not based on the things that have been told to me because of stigma. And that has caused a lot of trauma, even when, I'm trying to do my work and I'm starting to hear all these negative things. And then again, coming back to spaces where I'm trying to access services and something gets triggered in me and I'm going to react out of that trauma. We can go to the next slide. I know we only have, so coming from a trauma-informed perspective is really looking at the shift from what's wrong with you as to what happened to you. And what I really want to emphasize to this is not, it's just what happened to you, but it's also, you are not just what happened to you, right? Like, we are survivors, we move forward and we're strong. And so, yes, we are going to be reactive and coming from a place of having these experiences of trauma, but that is also not just what defines a person, all the things that happen to them, but understanding that there's not something wrong with that person, and how do we move past being able to provide that services in spite of all the things that might be coming up from this person, whether that's a physical or an emotional reaction, all the barriers that are going to come into place for them accessing these services with all the trauma that folks have experienced, right? We can move on to the next few slides. We can go to 45, actually 40. Yeah, we can do this one. So trauma-informed perspective. And so again, looking at this from the different points of view, where we're first looking at there's something wrong with you, whereas what happened to you, why you're reacting in this manner. Do I need to slow down interpretation?
Hi, Dale. This is Cindy at Temecula Valley.
Yes.
Oops.
Go ahead, Cindy.
Uh,
Now you're muted. Oh, okay. So yes, perspective is everything, Jose. Next slide. So the core principles of trauma-informed care is looking at creating safety, trustworthiness. You're being transparent with your folks, like I was talking about the intake. Why are we asking these questions? How is it benefiting you, or how is it benefiting the organization for us to be able to have funding to provide these services, right? Being clearly transparent about that. Peer support and mutual help. Sometimes we say that we want to hire peers, but we're really not set up in a model that is going to really be peer focused and that success of that peer, right? And our policies, and also, you know, not pigeonholing folks to certain positions like outreach and peers, right? That seems to be the thing, but we're not really supporting peers in moving up the ladder of their education and their career, whatever their goals might be. And that this work is done collaboratively and mutually with the individual that we're serving. We're always going to be led by the individual, right? It's not just our goals, our ideas of what this person should be doing. And empowering and uplifting the voices of people who use drugs and sex workers. Again, because we're being led by community, we want to make sure that folks feel empowered, and we're giving them leadership trainings and spaces to, you know, step up and talk, and we step back so that folks can, you know, voice what they need to be voicing, so that we can, and incorporating what they say, right? And then not ignoring that there is a specific cultural, historical, and gender issues that are really going to come into play for us to be able to work from a trauma-informed care. Again, you know, we brought up the point of that there is a lot of, continues to be anti-Black and anti-immigrant sentiment in this country, and how that affects access or wanting to even access to care, right? And the trauma that comes with that. Jose, I can pass it on to you so you can probably skip this, and then we'll start at 51.
I think it's the one after this. Yeah. So moving into like principles of a healing centered approach, you know. So, you know, when we are speaking and interacting with the people we're providing services to, or who we're working with, we always want to keep in our mind safety. Like, and this is all stuff that, you know, Jasenia just mentioned, you know, working on building that trust, you know, and being transparent in the sense of not only what the individual needs, but also, what are your personal expectations for the, for that, dynamic between y'all, um, because it's good to, as far as leading by example, setting goals in front of the individual, will probably, um, it will basically promote that within themselves, so we want goals that we want the individual to like think about, and then goals that they want themselves to think about, or you, peer support, um collaboration and mutuality at all times. Like I said, sometimes we need to take a step back and, you know those moments where we feel we're throwing our own expectations on the individual, we need to, step back and reevaluate, how this can be a collaboration, between us two, and more like what the individual wants and how can I help, you know, that's probably the most ideal collaboration. The empowerment of the individual, the individual having the ability to voice, their opinions, concerns, and being validated at the same time also, and having as many choices as possible. And like Jasenia eloquently stated, understanding that we must keep in mind that there will always be cultural concerns that we need to keep in mind, certain traumas that come up from certain experiences, current and historical. You could go to the next slide. The most important thing to remember is that the environment we create communicates our beliefs about the people we serve, as well as the way we offer services. So you must understand that it shouldn't only, and I said this earlier, it shouldn't only be you that has like a trauma-informed approach or way of thinking. We should always try to get our whole team aligned with our values and how important it is, because if we not all on the same page, sometimes stuff will spill over on us unintentionally. For example, I know we tight on time, but there was this time that I was working in the shelter and I would work overnight. Sometimes I would work overnight with other people, but most of the time I would work overnight by myself. And there's this rule like don't give out food to the people, after dinner time, but there's food left over from the day before in the fridge. And I always felt like it's gonna be thrown out. So I don't mind giving the food. Now, other people, they adhere to the strict rule, no, and they would say it in a disrespectful way. And there was this one individual that will always he would never give me problems when I'm working alone, obviously, because I give the food. But whenever somebody else is there, this person is actually like loud, like, and not only are they defensive towards the person like I'm working with, but it will spill over on me because we are colleagues together, but then, I spoke to this person one day and I was like, like you treat me good when I'm here alone, but it's always a problem. And the person explained to me, he's like, that person um always disrespects me while saying no. If a person would say, hey, these are the rules, and I'm not allowed to, like, I don't have no choice but to like accept it. But when you say no, the rules and you're like lashing out at me and all of that, like, well, I'm gonna give it back to you. And this is why it's important that we all see things the same, right? Because now, because of the person I was working with, now this person has some kind of ill will towards me in certain situations. And the same thing can happen. Your organization can get a reputation because one person doesn't see things the way the organization sees it. Next slide, please. Patient-centered care, healing-centered environment, and harm reduction. And person-centered care, people who use services work in partnership with their health and social care professionals. I can't emphasize, how much is important for the person to be included into any care, whether it's Hep C care, whether it's referrals, to any kind of services they may need. It should always come from the person, because the moment we start throwing our expectations on people, we could push them away. And there's been a lot of times I've seen in my time that people don't come back. And that's the last thing we want, because when they don't come back, we have no control over any kind of support, and we don't know what happens in that time that they gone. They can die. Next slide. We'll go to the next slide. So, from trauma to healing, healing-centered engagement, a healing-centered approach to addressing trauma requires a different question that moves beyond what happened to you to what's right with you, and views those exposed to trauma as agents in the creation of their own well-being rather than victims of traumatic events. So we recognize in resiliency, self-efficacy, and autonomy when we are talking with people and we're asking them why the uncomfortability with certain appointments, or maybe they may be missing appointments, and we are having, a mutual conversation, like what's going on, and how can I best support you so that any insecurities or concerns you may have, we can walk through them together. So many times people expect people to be okay with doctors, like I've heard people say, like, why are you scared of a doctor? And like, that's the worst thing you could tell somebody, because yeah, physically they may be harmless, but all of that stigma and all of that other hateful stuff that comes out of them, that could be more destructive than anything we give them physically. Next slide. In person-centered care, people who use services work in partnership with their health and social care professionals. They are treated with dignity, empathy, and respect. And that is the main piece of any kind of like approach that we give our people. In order for us to get our people to want to do something for themselves, we have to invest in their health and their dignity. Once we invest in people's health and dignity, they are feeling that they are worthy. And once they feel they are worthy, they start wanting to access different services and supports that can better their experience. But if we're promoting, anything else, if our policies are punitive, if our ways of relaying messages have like a lot of stigmatizing languages in them, we're not gonna get there. We're not gonna get nowhere. This is why, as much as I could, even in my personal life, I try to talk to people neutrally, man, because like I tell my boys all the time, like, I'd rather you come call me and we could talk than, I have to go carry your casket. And we have to keep that approach with our people. Let's invest in people's health and dignity, and like, let's push our community forward. Next slide. So person-centered care sees the person, not their behavior, and recognizes the role that stigma plays in othering people, which in turn creates barriers to accessing services and support. Like we mentioned earlier, when we was talking about the way we was on a stigma circle and how each action led to the next bubble. To eventually the last bubble was them internalizing, everything that they experienced, and embodying that. So like, if a person gets pushed away and told that they're not worthy, after a while, guess what? They're gonna believe it. This is why I said, like, you paint somebody as a villain, eventually they're gonna say, okay, I am, and they will willingly step into that role. Next slide. So person-centered care promotes positive well-being. It honors the choice of the individual, enhances their dignity, and empowers them, improves their quality of life, and it supports independence and autonomy. You can go to the next slide. And this is the last slide, but this is something that you can think about, on your time, like always, trying to identify what practices are kind of counterproductive to our community members and their well-being and their respect, right? Like we spoke about, somebody said in the chat earlier how like when people come into like their program, they're addressed as the substance use disorder folks or stuff like that. So we should always keep that in mind. And the reason why I didn't have a convo with this is because we're 5 minutes away from the end, and I wanted to leave space because this can be a lot for people. So if anybody has like any kind of questions or concerns or like anything that we can, can talk through with them in this little bit of time that we do have. And you're more than welcome to ask any questions, share any concerns or whatever's on your mind.
Well, I just want to say thank you guys for this workshop. It's pretty eye-opening, and thank you.
Thank you, Fabiola, for being here. And if we don't have any questions, I would like to know, what you'll be taking back to your organization about, implementing any harm reduction or trauma-informed care into your workplace or just on your own. Because harm reduction is everything, everywhere, all the time. Thank you, Dakota.
Well, what I think I'll be taking from this is like just have empathy with everybody. It doesn't matter what's your background, how you got there. It's more how you get out of there, and who's behind you.
Thank you. Perfect. Yes, if that's the one thing that is the most beautiful and something that will carry you for a really long time. And thank you so much. We were afraid we were going to run out of time, Jose, and we ran through that. And now we have, 4 minutes left.
We got 4 minutes left. We should go back to a few slides we had to skip.
Itzel, I see you come off camera. Good to see your face. Did you want to say something? No, I like that you came off camera to say
No,
goodbye.
not at this time. I'm sorry.
No,
I'm so sorry. No, not at this time. I just wanted to apologize for like hopping in late. We just got a little busy, but I
no.
appreciate all the conversation and things.
Thank you for being here. And yeah, so Harmony put in the chat that we're going to be having 2 more trainings now. And the link to register is in the chat, and then also the evaluation, if you can please fill that out for us so we can always improve on anything that we need to improve on and learn from your all's voice and what's needed. So thank you. Thank you, John.
Thanks for having us.
All right, folks. Well, thank you. We can end 3 minutes, 2 minutes. I don't know how to count. All right, I'm going to stop the recording.